Well, hello there, Christopher Scott here. Thanks for joining me for another video as we go verse by verse through the Gospel of John. It's great to have you watching here. If these videos are new for you, there's an article down there in the description of this video. It's an article that I wrote and was published at New Identity Magazine. You can click on that link. You don't need to enter your email address or anything. It's a free article you can read. And that article goes through the Bible study process that I use for these videos, in case you might like to learn a little bit more about how I do Bible study and how you can study the Bible for yourself as well. So today we're talking about Jesus whipping the waiters at the temple from chapter 2 of John. Chapter 2, verses 13 through 25 is what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to look at this together. And in the first 6 chapters of the Gospel of John, it's describing Jesus. And it starts with his arrival in chapter 1. He arrives on the scene, and it describes who Jesus is. And then chapter 2 are some of his travels. In the first half of chapter 2, we see that Jesus was in Cana, where he turns water into wine. And then he goes to Capernaum, and then he goes to Jerusalem, which is where he whips the waiters. I had a little fun with the title, Whipping the Waiters. Or another professor, a professor I had said it's the temple tantrum, is what he called it. So let's read it together. We'll talk about it together. So chapter 2, verse 13. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And in those who were selling the doves, he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up." The Jews then said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name, observing his signs which he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, was not entrusting himself to them, for he knew all men, and because he did not need anyone to testify concerning man, for he himself knew what was in man. That's God's inspired, inerrant word. So let's start with some basic observations. What does the text say? If I was to give a one-sentence description of this passage, I would say Jesus was angry that people were taking the temple and making it about money. Some people believed in him, but Jesus didn't trust them. It's really, he gets angry at these people taking advantage of them. And the last part of the chapter says, some people believed in Jesus, but he didn't trust them because he knew what was in their heart. Okay? And here it says, verse 13, the Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And I'm a California kid. I grew up in the middle of the state of California. So we would say if we're going to go up north to Sacramento, we say we're going to go up to Sacramento. Or if you needed to drive south to Los Angeles, you said, I'm going to go down to Los Angeles. We talked about up and down geographically, as in north and south, okay? But in the Bible, when they said, Jesus went up to Jerusalem, it means elevation. The city of Jerusalem was 2,500 feet above sea level, and it says Jesus was in Capernaum, which was right at sea level. It was right next to the Sea of Galilee, so it was even a little bit below, actually, sea level. The Sea of Galilee is pretty far inland. I think it's about 300 feet below sea level. So Jesus was literally going up to Jerusalem. And when you read the Psalms, the book of Psalms, some of those Psalms are called, a psalm of ascent, meaning they were going up to Jerusalem, and this is a psalm they were singing on their way to Jerusalem, a psalm of ascent, while they were walking up to the city of Jerusalem and to the temple, which was kind of located even on a little, propped up even among the city a little bit as well. Right? And here in verse 21, let's see, what verses we want to start with here? Yeah, let's start with 18 and 20. Let me read you 18 through 20. And it's interesting what happens, what's said, and then John interprets what is said for us, okay? So starting in verse 18, it says, "The Jews said to him, 'What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?' Jesus answered them, 'Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up.' The Jews then said, 'It took 46 years to build this temple, and you will rise it up again in 3 days?'" So that's the interaction that Jesus has. And then the gospel writer John gives us an interpretation of what is said. Verse 21. "But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken." Okay? The word which Jesus has spoken. So when we interpret the Bible and read the Bible, I'm going into the interpretation part now. What does the text mean? We want to start by reading the text and taking a basic literal understanding of the Bible. We always want to start there. Just read the Bible and let it plainly speak to us. God is God in heaven. He has given us his word to read and understand, and he's given it to us in a language we can understand as well. So we don't have to do all this crazy deciphering work and, codes and mysteries and things like that. He's given us word. He wants us to read it, understand it, and apply it. So when we read the text, we want to start with the basic literal understanding of the text. But sometimes we're going to interpret it non-literally. And there's a couple reasons. Number one, sometimes the author of a passage will tell us this is meant to be symbolic. The best example I know of is in the book of Revelation in chapter 11. It talks about this evil, wicked city that John happens to actually be the same John that wrote this gospel. John says this evil, wicked city is symbolically called Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? He says symbolically. So right there, that's our hint. Okay, this is not literally Sodom and Gomorrah. It is a symbol, meaning it's a different city that has those characteristics of Sodom and Gomorrah, which they weren't even on the scene at that time. Anyway, so that's one reason we're going to not interpret the Bible literally, is when we get a cue from the writer. Another time when we're not going to take it literally is when it absolutely in no way possible makes sense literally, just as it is in this passage too. It took 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to build it up in 3 days? It doesn't make any sense, okay? That's another place where Jesus isn't literally going to rebuild that temple. It's now going to be his body, which is the temple spiritually. Okay, so, and again, John tells us that, and he gives us that interpretation. So that's just something I want to give you as you read the Bible for yourself. Try to take it in the basic, literal way first. At least start there, and then deviate from it if it, number one, absolutely in no way can make sense. Number two, if the author tells you, which they sometimes will tell you. There's a couple other reasons as well, but that's the two most basic principles that I've come across and that I've shared with people. Okay. Another thing I wanted to mention here, that they're in Passover. What is Passover? We're not Jewish. I'm not Jewish. You're probably not Jewish. So Passover comes from Exodus 11, which is when God announced that they're going to have this special Passover meal in Exodus 11. Then in Exodus 12, Moses and Aaron institute this feast that they have to commemorate and remember what God had done. And then Exodus 13 is when they did it in the wilderness, and they actually practiced it in the wilderness. So you can read Exodus 11, 12, and 13, learn more about Passover and what it means. Another thing we want to talk about, why do you think Jesus was so disturbed by these money changers at the temple tantrum, as Dave Wainscott taught me in college. I think he was so upset because these people were taking advantage of people that wanted to have a relationship with God. More specifically, it was probably the outer court area where most of the poor people were buying things. They couldn't bring them with them, and they had to buy them at the temple. And it's the outer court that these people were selling all these items. I don't think God is happy when we take his temple, his church, his holy assembly, and use it to make money, if that makes sense, okay? So what are some applications? How do we apply this passage to our life? What are some applications? Number one, we shouldn't use church as a merchandising opportunity or a networking opportunity or goal, okay? Church should not be a place we go to sell our goods or to network for our business. As a pastor working at a church for years and years, it's interesting how when election comes up, a lot of the people running for office, they're at church regularly, and they're not just at church, they're in the front row, so everybody can see them, okay? Now, it is great that they are there. I am happy they are there. I'd rather them be there than not, but it's just interesting for me that when they're at their busiest time campaigning for office, they happen to always also be at church in the front row. Right? There's other people I have experienced that they always go to church with their business cards. They're ready. They're ready to talk. Again, I'm not sure that God is happy with us when we do that. But like I said, it's better they're there than not. At the same time, we just need to be careful with that. Okay? A second application, righteous anger is okay. We see Jesus's righteous anger here. That's okay. When we hear about unborn babies being killed in abortions, as Christians, it's okay to have some righteous anger towards that topic, not towards the woman or her decision or anything. It's just broad in that topic. It's okay to be a little angry about that situation, okay? But again, we're not going to ever pick on those women that decide that because there's a lot of trauma and grief that comes along with that and that they end up experiencing later on. So we never want to add to that, okay? So I hope this has been a helpful video for you. Jesus's anger at the temple. He whips the waiters. Temple tantrum from David Wainscott that he taught me. Hope this was a good video for you. Thanks for watching. We'll continue going verse by verse through the Gospel of John. So hopefully you can subscribe up there, get updates on future videos, and there's a couple other videos that'll pop on the screen here too. Thanks for watching. Catch you again soon.